What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here, doing a rendition of an older video I did, Madara Hashirama vs Obito. I think it's a pretty interesting listen or interesting discussion, and I thought I'd actually redo this video and add on to it as a lot of my opinions have changed, along with a lot of misconceptions I want to address in today's video. The video will be divided up into three parts. Madara Hashirama as Edo Tensei, the duo when they're alive, and the duo Madara has his Rinnegan and Hashirama Sage Mode. That being said, like and subscribe, or don't, it is what it is, and we'll get into the video. Now, usually I would start off these videos with discussing how strong these characters are, or how strong the group in question are, but I feel like that's obviously a little self-explanatory, and I don't really have to go through that with this video. I more so have to discuss these characters off one another, and that'll become more clear when we get into the discussion. Now, when discussing Obito against Edo Tensei, Madara, and Hashirama, there's a couple of absolutes. Obito, even in an unstable state, is stronger than Edo Hashirama. Hashirama is more than likely basing this off of Obito flexing the gracious deity gates off of him, invoking praise from the likes of Hiruzen and Tobirama. I also want to add this is more than likely in terms of chakra quantity, as well as Tobirama, a renowned sensory shinobi who even Hashirama refers to, supplements Hashirama's statement with confirmation. That or Tobirama is also basing it off the gracious deity gate feat. Either way, it doesn't matter too much. I've heard people say that Hashirama's not referring to himself with Sage Mode, but this would just be extremely weird.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Like, if that was the case, he's like, I would need Sage Mode to fight this guy. But no, that's not the case. He's referring to himself as a whole. And it's a little weird because Hashirama just doesn't fight Obito. Like, Madara cuts him off before he joins the fight, which makes it more difficult to deduce how much stronger Obito is than him. This gets even more muddied by statements relating to Naruto and Sasuke that we'll discuss in a bit. Now, what we need to understand is that Obito fights the biggest group of fraudulent individuals I've seen. Certified schemers.
No, come on. You're not an intellectual. You're a fake and a fraud.
Tobirama got a rod in his back for every policy against the Uchiha. Minato caught you and your girl's body. Double homicide. Naruto, your daddy's dead. He'll tell you all about it. Sasuke, your brother's dead too, but he already told you about it. The IRS has all these dudes on lock for tax evasion. Now, jokes aside, these four fighters required the highest level IQ plays to even get attacks off or open up Obito for other attacks, most of which have absolutely zero effect. The fact that Obito also doesn't insta-lose and is blatantly dominating after the group discovers he has a 4x weakness to Senjutsu. Bro is literally Scizor to a fire type move. The effectiveness just can't be overstated, by the way, as even Gamakichi's random attack caused more apparent effect on the Truth-Seeking Orb than the likes of Tobirama's Tandem Paper Bombs, Obito's own Tailed Beast Bombs, even large-scale Tailed Beast Bombs nuking inside the Crimson Ray barrier. But the frog spits one questionable-looking substance at Obito, and, you know, there is a bit of an effect. Now, Obito should start off with a pretty blatant speed edge. There's a couple of avenues you could go around for kind of discussing Obito's speed. One interpretation is made pretty clear with him blatantly outdoing the likes of Tobirama in terms of speed. While being so fast, QB Naruto is unable to follow the movements going on the battlefield, with even QB Minato remarking his swiftness, this being in terms of raw movement speed. The reason this is prevalent is if you're under the interpretation that Tobirama is faster, quote-unquote faster, not stronger, not would win in a fight against, but faster than Madara and Hashirama, off of Madara's statement of him boasting the fastest speed of any shinobi. The reason this is relevant is that every time Tobirama had teleported to the mark on Obito's back, him teleporting plus his combat speed was just never moving so fast that Obito was ever getting overwhelmed, or the speed was never an issue. Like, he was constantly forced to sync up with Minato to open up Obito, or just blatantly teleport other people to Obito's back. The mark Tobirama places on Obito is the actual only reason they're ever able to really force Obito into combo positions or teleport users directly on top of him. The only time this actually amounts to anything useful is when Naruto and Tobirama slam a Sage Art Rasengan into Obito's back. For those who don't understand why Obito's letting this happen, he's actually not fully aware that he's been marked by Tobirama, as it happened while he was unstable and grappling with the Ten Tails in his psyche. He deduced this, or at least inferred it, that they were getting to his back somehow, and activated the flames on his back to guard his back from future attacks, which really only happens again when two QB avatars, enhanced by Sage Mode, teleport on top of his back, and he's completely ready for it. Like, it doesn't catch him by surprise. So you have to ask yourself, this is what it kind of takes to, like, open up Obito. It's not looking too good for Hashirama and Madara. It also is a bit harder to deduce exactly where Hashirama and Madara are in terms of speed, due to the fact they mostly, like, scale off each other. Like, yeah, Madara has some great feats. He blatantly bullies KCM2 Naruto. Like, he tries to run at him or jump at him with like a mini tail beast bomb. Madara's like, nah, get that shit out of here. But then obviously that Naruto goes through great development throughout the war, and even then he's always objectively below Obito throughout the war. So a stark issue for this duo off the bat is that on top of Obito having maybe comparable, if you want to be more generous, to Hashirama and Madara, to superior speed, which is what I go with, he has truth-seeking orbs which entirely neg Edo Tensei fighters, at least when used by a stabilized Jinchuriki. This essentially makes it so Madara and Hashirama have no real margin for error in this discussion, while having all their offensive and defensive ninjutsu mitigated. Now you could maybe say there's a discussion to be had that the duo's defenses might be able to stop or defend against the orbs to a minor degree, as we see Sasuke is capable of blocking unstable Jubito's orb, although the effect leaves the arm used agape with a giant hole in the palm, meaning even if the duo did gain some momentary survival, it would destroy their avatars, leading to the next onslaught being the finishing blow, essentially only really prolonging the inevitable. I will say though, it does seem more likely that the duo would be able to react to the truth-seeking orbs, at least the extension of it, which is shown to be consistently slower than Obito's raw movement speed. For example, Hiruzen and Sasuke are able to react to slightly or to some degree, like move away from Obito's truth-seeking extension, which is something that Madara's orbs share. They're way slower than Madara himself. And then Obito, like for example, the same Sasuke reacts to his orbs, Obito can just straight up grab Sasuke's face through a Susanoo with his raw movement speed. So there is a difference, and I will say I think there is a case for Madara and Hashirama to be able to kind of avoid this to some degree. But the main issue is that the duo's offensive prowess doesn't really hold too much offensive weight against the truth-seeking sphere, which has phenomenal feats. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. This is more so prevalent for the likes of Madara, who thought he needed Hashirama's Sage Power to take on Obito as an Edo, meaning he'd be forced to coordinate with Hashirama in this case. So Madara himself doesn't even think he's strong enough to fight Obito as is, meaning it's more so up to Hashirama to kind of break down these defenses. Now, granted, you don't need Senjutsu to break down the truth-seeking orb and whatnot. Guy did display this because he's able to punch Madara through the other side of one of the truth-seeking spheres. But the spheres themselves don't really have any issues dealing with like these large-scale avatars and their attacks. Even when Naruto and Sasuke are amping their abilities via Senjutsu, Obito has no qualms or issues about blocking any of that. Same thing with, Naruto amping his Sage Mode Rasengan with Minato. So it's like even this same type attack bonus Pokemon Goo 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 Ray that they can just...
Holy look at all this damage!
Okay, I'm gonna chill out with the jokes. My bad, guys. But the point is, just simply stacking Senjutsu does not inherently mean you're just gonna slap Obito away or something like that. And I will discuss that a little bit later. I will get into that a little bit more. It may be possible for Hashirama to do some pretty disastrous damage using the Sage Art, True Several Thousand Hands Top Transform Buddha. By the way, I'm gonna call that Shinsu Senju for short, because I'm not saying that again ever, which Hashirama uses as a unison of Senjutsu and wood release techniques. This does, however, require time to charge up, as Hashirama does have to amass the nature energy, although in reference to him entering Sage Mode, this is noted to be instant via the data book and what's displayed in the series. This is also a buff for all his stats and jutsu, as it's noted to raise the bar for all ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. Even if Hashirama split his strength via wood clones that can use his jutsu, we know this off Madara and how Hashirama's wood clones mentioned that they would use Deep Forest Emergence to kind of move or propel the tail beast bombs that Obito was going to shoot towards the ocean. This would cut Hashirama's strength down to some arbitrary degree. We don't know by how much, just that Tobirama notes Hashirama absorbing his remaining wood clones wouldn't make a difference against Obito, implying that if he absorbed them, it would be somewhat of a buff. Obito just comes in a lot more confident here, a lot of rush down with the truth-seeking orbs. He really doesn't have to fight that crazy, whereas Hashirama and Madara have to play a perfect fight for them to even get remotely close to a W. Something that Obito can do that a lot of people have mentioned, or I think brought up, I don't know, is that he can make the 6 Crimson Ray formation barrier and nuke the duo straight up. This might have actually happened in canon, like in the show. The reason I say this is that Madara and Hashirama are shown fighting with the perfect Susanoo or wooden golem before Obito drops his nukes inside the barrier. And when you come back to Madara and Hashirama, they're not on their avatars or inside them. Granted, this does happen off screen, so you cannot really assert one thing or another. I just think it's interesting to note because Hashirama and Madara were not teleported outside the barrier like everybody else who had Naruto's chakra. There's nothing really to stop Obito from just sitting back, throwing large-scale nukes, trapping Hashirama and Madara. Even if Hashirama does get out the Shinsu Senju, it's highly questionable if he'd be able to take down Obito by himself with that technique, especially as an Edo Tensei, or at the very least his truth-seeking defense. Another win con for Obito, by the way, to just kind of demonstrate how much of a, I don't want to say stomp, but how much stronger Obito is than as these two are like hard counters them, because on top of this strength, his arsenal is just so much more hacks. He's more of a direct counter. He has ways to mitigate their biggest thing, which is like their giant avatars. Obito can also just blatantly separate the God Tree from himself and use it offensively to distract the Edo duo while he goes to fight them. Could be a potential nerf if you consider Madara absorbing the same God Tree a buff, but they'd be preoccupied with it just like they were in canon, which would just let Obito go in for whatever option he wants, whether that just be rush them down, sort of no Noboku, whatever you really choose. Obito can afford to make mistakes, Hashirama and Madara can afford to make none in this fight. So I think against Edo, Hashirama and Madara, Obito takes it pretty confidently, with the bottom line being that essentially Edo Hashirama is no match for Obito, with Madara being directly on par as they tied out during the war. And even if they do perform well against Obito, they essentially have no margin for error, whereas Obito can make mistakes and acclimate toward the two with hacks to absolutely neg their best assets, that being their avatars, with the stats to back it up. Something I want to add too is that there's also Naruto and Sasuke to consider in this encounter, as for example, Sasuke and Naruto pretty much acclimate to Obito, despite not, for example, I'll use Sasuke because he's not on Edo Madara's level when he fights Obito for at least one period of time. I'm essentially referring to the scene where he's about to rush at Obito with Naruto, and then Orochimaru states that one day he'll be a shinobi that surpasses Madara. By the way, also, he absorbed all the intel from Kabuto about the war, so he would have an idea of how Madara fights and what he's capable of, so he should have a good idea of Madara's strength. The problem is the statements made about Sasuke being a shinobi who will surpass Madara are actually before he continues to adapt to Obito's movements and improve further along with Naruto, so we don't know how much farther he's accelerated compared to what Orochimaru and Tobirama judge him. Orochimaru making the statement and Tobirama more so judging Sasuke off his potential. Now, despite this, even though Naruto and Sasuke do acclimate to Jubito, it doesn't really change too much since Obito has no issues keeping pace with their movements and proceeds to one-shot both of their avatars the moment he's had enough of them acclimating. This is also attributed to Obito wanting to break Naruto's will and confirm his own ideology, which is a big reason he does a lot of what he does in the war. Even though the approach doesn't seem optimal, their ideological clash has direct effect on Obito, and he almost feels obligated to break Naruto, to the point we see him having flashes of regret in his final clash with Naruto and Sasuke. This, by the way, doesn't even mean the duo just won against Obito, since they needed the entire alliance, plus the Edo Gokage, plus their own strength combined to actually pull the tail beast out of Obito. So, solo, this just never would have worked. Obito would have regenerated, and Naruto and Sasuke would have lost, demonstrated by the fatigue they exhibit right after the encounter. What does all this mean? What am I getting at? It means that even if you want to make the case that Naruto or Sasuke is weaker than Edo Madara or Hashirama, which I think is very debatable, especially in Naruto's case, it doesn't really amount to anything, especially when trying to bring in Madara and Hashirama, due to how Obito continuously displayed superiority at every turn, along with the character prerogatives at play. So saying those two performed well, and that means Hashirama and Madara would just like slam, that's not, we didn't read the same manga. But yeah, Edo duo just really doesn't have too much. Like, none of their strikes should really be able to break the truth-seeking orb. Even if they do, Obito just has such an easier time in this fight with everything listed, along with a plethora of win cons to distract and defeat the duo. Next up, we have a live Hashirama and Madara. They're almost the same, with the loss of constantly regenerating chakra supply, like just, you know, refilling over time, which really shouldn't be an issue regardless for these guys, since they can go blow for 3 days and nights straight. So their reserves really aren't a question. This is really the same discussion with just the added line, but they're stronger though. We know that, at least in the case of Madara and Hashirama, when returning to life, it seems to be a pretty drastic increase in strength. This is displayed with Madara being able to blow off the deity gates restraining him as an Edo Tensei the second he returns to life. Also supplemented by the statement he makes to Tobirama pertaining to how there's a reason the Senju brothers can't regain their full power. This tier is a bit dependent on how big of a jump you think Madara and Hashirama shoot up in strength via being alive. For example, we know Madara is stronger than his Edo Tensei counterpart, even with no eyes, in the sense of physical stats. He could be considered an inferior combatant due to all the factors with Edo Madara and the hacks at his disposal. Not only does Hashirama note that he's getting stronger, but the data book also confirms it, that Madara could not hide his delight and excitement as his original strength filled every corner of his new body. All of the previous points still stand for Obito, with the added stat boost losing Edo Tensei regen means nothing in this fight, nor does Hashirama having his alive regen make any sort of difference due to the fundamentals of the truth-seeking orb. So it's not as if there's like a huge ability shift in this discussion. There's objectively no real way to quantify or compare how much stronger Hashirama and Madara are when they're alive compared to their Edo Tensei counterpart, which makes these versions of the characters harder to place. This is more so due to how Madara and Hashirama generally scale off one another, as they either dominate everyone they fight against or are just weaker than unstable Jubito in a nerf state. We know that Tobirama notes that they are close to their original power, which is also an arbitrary way to gauge it. I know it seems simple, but close could be 80% of their full power, 90%, 95%. It's just not made too clear. Something I will add is that Madara was given some considerable buffs as an Edo Tensei. He was altered to his youth, given Hashirama cells, yet he didn't really feel anything or was really impressed with that until his actual strength was restored. So maybe you could derive something off that. Although again, it could just be his character tick, since Madara gets aroused by battle and he felt different when that blood hit.
Yeah, boy.
So I won't really die on this point. I won't dismiss the possibility and the likelihood that the alive variants pose more of a threat to Obito and potentially surpass him in some stat category, but nothing really changes too much with the alive variants, at least in my eyes. Obito still has so much more of a hacks arsenal with all the same conditions listed. Madara still has to sync with Hashirama, who still requires time to summon the Shinsu Senju. Nothing really should change too much with these variations. Even if they are still quote-unquote stronger, they still have to pitch a perfect game. I won't fault anybody who goes off the interpretation they may be stronger, and I think there is some merit to it, but I wouldn't say the gap would inherently put them leagues above Obito, especially when comparing how much stronger he was to the Edo counterparts. Is Edo Hashirama, who's weaker than unstable Obito, gain a comparable buff to Obito, gaining more control over the Ten Tails? It's up to you. If I was going to give Hashirama and Madara a W, it'd have to be with a more amplified version of the Gracious Deity Gates into a potential Shinsu Senju, or Perfect Susanoo plus Wooden Golem Barrage. The reason I would argue the Deity Gates is due to how it fundamentally pours nature energy onto those underneath it, blocking their will. This also is predicated on the idea they would be stronger if alive Hashirama uses them. If you don't think that, then just toss this point out the window. I might also add that the problem with their avatars is that the Perfect Susanoo and Wooden Golem are more comparable to the full Nine Tails. That verbatim states this. I think they would be superior, but I think that's more like discussing a tier of strength for these avatars, which Obito would be pretty substantially above. There are like ways for Hashirama to maybe get around Obito. Like, he actually might be able to suppress him with his wood style. There is a scene when Tobirama and Hashirama's wood clone are kind of syncing up against unstable Jubito, and Hashirama actually is able to subdue this version of Obito for a period of time while Hashirama lines up the Tana paper bombs. But again, that's unstable Jubito. Although I will say, I feel like I just threw in like 3 contradictory phrases back to back. But I will say, Obito is cognitive enough to where he feels like if he knows an attack might do substantial damage, he'll like straight up block it. He still can fight, so that might be something. Maybe you think they can suppress Obito for enough just due to them being stronger. It's definitely possible. I will say though, Madara again in this encounter is the lacking one just due to this Senjutsu. He's gonna have to like raw power his way through the truth-seeking defenses, which just isn't possible even for his Perfect Susanoo. And the team is essentially a little too reliant on Hashirama at this point. So I think the duo would perform a lot better and definitely press Obito a bit more, but Tensei counterparts. Next up, we have Rinnegan Madara and Alive Hashirama. Now, this is kind of like the extra round in this scenario, as now both combatants have access to Senjutsu as Madara obtains Hashirama's Sage Mode, plus his Rinnegan, plus just having Hashirama's cells added to his base, so he has like a double sensory boost on top of his Rinnegan. Now, the first thing people are going to point to is the statement on the back of Naruto Volume 69.
Nice.
Where the English version states Rinnegan Madara is the strongest villain the shinobi world has ever faced. Viz has a habit during the localization process of changing these hyped up excerpts on the back of Naruto volumes, and this is one of those volumes. In the case in the Japanese version of the volume, it makes no mention of Madara being the strongest villain the shinobi world has ever seen, meaning that this statement is really just not usable for any sort of scaling. You'd be surprised at how many of these volume backs are just not the same as the Japanese version, have been heavily altered, on top of them being made more so to hype up certain points in the story. But bottom line, this statement sucks and isn't usable. There may be a consistency though, that with this kind of narrative pertaining to maybe the anime, being that Madara is also stated the greatest anime after the Alliance had fought Obito.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Which continues a narrative that's attempting to be perpetuated with Sage Mode Rinnegan Madara being stronger than Obito. Again, I know that's the anime, but I do think it's interesting to note that this is trying to be pushed. Now, Madara is going to be far more useful than his EMS counterpart, as he's had some pretty severe increases. He essentially gets the alive buff, plus having Hashirama Sage Mode, plus his Rinnegan, and the Rinnegan would be a buff as it's noted to have his own chakra, along with the fact that White Mask Obito did get buffed from his Orange Mask counterpart via having the Rinnegan, with the big introduction of Limbo. Now, I'll start off by saying that Obito should be able to see Limbo. The databook notes that a Rinnegan is the requirement for being able to see the Phantom or peer into the realm of Limbo. Obito would also have a similar 6-patch sensory boost, somewhat comparable to Naruto's. I would say Naruto's is obviously greater since it's stated to be more so rivaling Madara's, who has more Sage power with the 8 tails plus half the 9 tails in his 10-tail state. But Obito really, bottom line, shouldn't have any issues sensing the other Madara. This does actually present some problems, as now Madara can essentially have 2 perfect Susanoo amped with Senjutsu against Obito himself with the distinct sensory boost. It's not as if Obito is a stranger, however, to fighting large-scale avatars, as seen from his performance against Naruto and Sasuke. This would, however, allow Hashirama time to gather nature energy for the Shinsu Senju, which would be very effective against Obito. This basically turns into a 3-on-1 with the added bonus Madara could potentially even sub Limbo in for himself. If he's put in a disadvantageous position, I wouldn't say, though, he's going to just sub himself if he gets severed in half by a truth-seeking sphere or orb or this sort of Nonoboku, but he could get him, sub himself out if he gets in a potential hold, like when Naruto grabbed Sasuke and Naruto's avatars. In a similar position when he's getting hit by like Naruto's Magnet Rasengan, which is based off Shikaku's power, which does have some pretty impressive ceiling prowess. I will say Obito also does have the option of stalling out the Limbo clone until it returns to Madara, although I do want to note it can return again after a short while. The Limbo clones obviously having all access to all the same abilities Madara does. Madara also does have a not so good performance against the Tail Beast, but he does know he's going to fight more sloppily due to having Hashirama's regen, so I don't personally put too much stock into the feat. I would also add that Obito still does have a distinct arsenal advantage. We're just reaching a level of fighter that should be able to contend with him from purely a stat perspective, and does have the one counter to him. Now, even though the Truth-Seeking Orb does kind of like, it's super effective against the Truth-Seeking Orb and Obito himself, when Naruto's Rasengan actually did slam into Obito's back, it did some decent damage, despite that Naruto being light years behind Obito in Sage Mode. Every other attack with Sage Mode on it never really connects with Obito, so we don't really get to see it. Maybe aside from like Naruto and Sasuke's combined attack, which just slices through him. The Senjutsu buff doesn't automatically mean that these large-scale avatars can just beat Obito, obviously based on Bijou Sage Mode Naruto getting blown back from the sheer impact of the Truth-Seeking Orb along with Minato, or how the orb manipulated has no issues blocking Naruto and Sasuke's Sage Mode attacks. I will say, though, the fact that Madara can fight alongside his Limbo clone for a prolonged period of time while Hashirama charges up these type of counterattacks does kind of paint a good picture, like, okay, they actually might be able to do something here. And this is also not taking into account how being alive would also amp their defenses. Again, the bottom line with the alive variants, though, is that it's rather unquantifiable. It's really harder. It's a decent bit harder to measure. We just know they're objectively stronger. How much is entirely dependent on what you think as an individual. But I definitely think this Madara has the best chance out of all the variations. He's still just as susceptible to lose. Like, nothing's going to really change with any of the hacks Obito displays. That's also why I'm not really talking about Obito, because all of the hacks he has just remain effective. Like, nothing really, like, that much changes. It's more so like, okay, Hashirama and Madara are like closing the distance each round. For all these matchups, Obito will have an easier time, in my opinion, due to how much more wiggle room and opportunity he has to make mistakes. The way I would view this is that the duo's ability to win increases with each subsequent form of the duo. This is another one of those matchups I'm like hesitant to give a verdict on because there is a few variables. However, I think this, despite still being debatable, is the safest bet if you were going to say like Sage Mode Rinnegan Madara plus, Hashirama Sage Mode plus Alive Hashirama. If you did give them the W against Obito, I think that's fair enough because of all the factors at play. With these giant avatars, the fact that you're going to have multiple stacking here, there might actually be enough to start breaking down Obito's defenses, as even a Rasengan was cracking the Truth-Seeking Orb that was blocking him in Minato's attacks. So the orbs themselves can be cracked. Like, they're not, they're obviously crazy, but they can be broken through with this super effective type bonus. So with the Deity Gate, you essentially actually have Madara performing a similar feat to Unstable Jubito. Granted, there aren't as many gates stacked on him, but he does get like his chakra absorbed by Hashirama's Wood Dragon, then hit by a Rasen Shuriken, then the gates. So that, it is kind of like he gets comboed up before this even happens. So there might be a comparable power jump here to where their alive selves are performing feats that only really Jubito can perform. And like, also, I'm not mentioning Wood Style because, pretty self-explanatory. You know, Hashirama's buff. They might have a more binding effect on Obito. Might have greater binding strength with his Wood Dragon, Wood Golem, respectively. Hashirama and Madara can also both use Wood Style at this point, so I could see like a combo Wood Style Deep Forest Emergence just clouding the entire battlefield. You can even have a 3-way Deep Forest Emergence with Madara's Limbo clone also using Wood Style. Like, it's that crazy, you know? They could actually like triple threat the techniques against Obito. So I actually do think this phase is very interesting to discuss, just due to how Sage Mode Madara really he's really the best of both worlds. Shout out Hannah Montana. The Limbo clone actually does add quite a bit to the matchup and does aid Madara and Hashirama in a lot of ways. So Obito actually would have a pretty tough time with it. Even if he can see it, it's not like Madara is just going to sit back. He'll just fight alongside it like he does in canon. So you essentially get 3 Senjutsu boosted attacks from characters who have comparable stats to arguably greater stats than Obito. In Madara's case, it's arguably 2 characters, and if you want to go off Hashirama stuff, it's arguably 3 characters. So there's actually a pretty good chance for these groups to take a W against Obito. You might even be able to say some of his win cons might not work. So for example, like the Tail Beast Bomb example I mentioned earlier, if you think their avatars survived that explosion, then none of this is working on a live Madara and Hashirama. But if you think they got destroyed, then oh, okay, does that work against them when they're alive because their avatars are buff? Obito at that point would definitely have to resort to the Sword of Nonoboku, kind of go with that Sword and Shield variant that he went against Naruto and Sasuke, and try to mow down the avatars or just take them down that way, which would be effective. So this is definitely the most interesting one, and I think this is the one with like is mostly up in the air. Like before, you know, they have some amps, maybe it's kind of questionable, but you know, Obito still is so much more hacks, has all this crazy stuff, whereas this one, there might be something there. Something I want to add for Obito too is that the Rinnegan rods that he can create aren't effective against Madara during his Sage mode or Edo Tensei counterpart. At least they shouldn't be. Like, he should be able to take them out with the Rinnegan, no problem. But A, they're always effective on Hashirama. You can always put them in and, you know, disrupt Hashirama's chakra supply. It's not really an issue. But something I want to know is that they would also be effective against EMS Madara now too. So he also loses the ability to combat that minor hacks. And that might not seem like a big deal, but it really just takes like 1 or 2 Rinnegan rods to completely disrupt your chakra flow. It also may not have the most immediate effect, as even Edo Tensei Hashirama was still able to use the deity gates while the rods were piercing his back, so maybe it has like a more prolonged effect on these fighters. But I will say, you know, that is something present, that is something Obito can do to Hashirama always throughout these matchups, and it's something EMS Madara also gets as a downside. He pretty much loses his way to mitigate that. I also want to add too, I didn't bring this up for the sake, just for the video, but if you go off the idea as well that Madara was planning to like psychologically break down Obito by revealing the Rin situation to him to weaken his will and like defeat him and take, you know, become the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, that also is like an added layer to all of these matchups and would probably like would just raise the likelihood of the duo winning. I didn't include it for the video just because like it's harder to talk about that in the discussion, but that is something to know, because Madara refers to like a trump card he has, so he might have used that to like break down Obito and like attack his psyche. Madara also did feel pretty confident as an Edo with Sage Mode to like take on Obito, but I don't know, man. So I definitely think Sage Mode Madara could be argued to be greater. I think that's entirely fair. I definitely think him and Hashirama with the arsenals presented definitely have a good chance of doing it, especially if they keep their range, able to maybe weave out of the way from like Obito's like truth-seeking orbs, keep up with Obito himself. I definitely think there is some ways to go about this, and all of Obito's win cons are extremely fair. Like, those all stand for all versions of the characters. So, you know, it kind of goes off that. I'm more so trying to fill in the blanks for Madara and Hashirama because Obito's already more of a stacked fighter, and it's more apparent how he wins a lot of these matchups. Another way of possibly viewing Madara in relativity to, you know, Naruto and Sasuke is that when Madara comes back to life, Naruto's able to like slam him down with the Nine Tails tail. This being Madara after he achieves Hashirama Sage Mode, but this also isn't Madara's perfect Susanoo. We don't know if he's still playing around at this point. Naruto's tail doesn't even break his avatar. It requires all of the tail beasts to like stack their tails on it. Could be used as a potential speed point to also maybe indicate that Obito may be stronger than No Eyes Madara, but then Madara gets his Rinnegan and might surpass Obito via that point. If I had to encapsulate my thoughts, for round 1, I pretty objectively say Obito. Round 2, a little dependent on where you scale live Madara and Hashirama, although I do still lean towards Obito. And then round 3, I do kind of lean towards Madara and Hashirama, just due to the numerous amps Madara receives. So that's the vid. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down below if you enjoyed. Why? Who you think wins? Why? Let me know what's your guys' opinion on all this stuff. And catch you next time. Bye-bye.